That is super exciting. That leads us to the first question, which is, could you both speak a bit about how Riya Collective started? And yeah, maybe a bit about how you validated that there was demand for this product and that it was the right thing for the two of you to work on.
Yeah. So Riya Collective really started, I think, because Sarina and I have been so passionate about starting some business together since 2010, really. Since we graduated college and were roommates in New York, we'd always been thinking of various ideas and various businesses that we wanted to start together. The very first one was still one of our favorites, but was really, we wanted to build a social gym, and then eventually a social reader. So that we've always been ideating while we worked full-time jobs. And Riya Collective, most recently, I would say, started. The idea just came about in 2015 when Sarina was getting married, and I, along with so many of our friends, were trying to find outfits for a multi-day, multi-event Indian wedding in the US, and realized that it was an impossible feat. Sarina, so much so that she obviously flew to India in order to do her shopping, as all Indian brides ultimately choose to do. And so it really started with, like, while we were working our full-time jobs, we decided on the weekends and evenings to just offer up the clothing from our closet to our friends and to their friends, any friends of friends. And it really just started with 5 dresses, frankly, that were from both of our closets. And it grew very organically and very much via word of mouth from there, where suddenly, and it took quite a bit of time, frankly. Like, we were working full-time jobs for about 2 years before we looked at each other in the eyes and we were like, should we quit our jobs and just do this full-time? Because it's not fun anymore. We're working 2 full-time jobs at the end of the day because we're rushing home from work, servicing customers and complete strangers in our living rooms, literally living rooms, which we were pitching as showrooms. And Saturday mornings, waking up to strangers buzzing our doors, and trying to come in and rent a dress for an event they had that evening.
Also, our husbands were getting really annoyed with us, like, changing in our living room situation, and they're like, "You guys either need to stop or, like, do this full time and get, like, a place in San Francisco, because it's, like, becoming a lot." So I think we really waited, like Arian's saying, like, we waited until we had enough, like, customer growth that it validated us, like, leaving full-time jobs. We, like, kind of took that route.
Yeah, I'd say, like, I think, I didn't touch on this, but, like, we were living in the same apartment building in the Mission. Like, our apartments were on top of one another, and she was married. I was living with my boyfriend, and yeah, we were just, like, shuttling dresses on racks between apartments for many months. And what was really, we decided to put up a website, and just created it on Shopify, and we just started getting orders from, honestly, all around the country. Complete strangers that had heard about us from a friend and a friend of a friend. And suddenly we were getting, thousands of dollars of transactions on this website with very little options. And that's when we kind of made the leap and we're like, okay, let's go all in. We feel like there's something here. And when we quit our jobs, and we, started working out of South Park Commons, is when we started to see, like, a bigger and bigger opportunity in this space. And I think, like, in so many ways, we've just followed the magic every time. It really came down to learning that for us, it wasn't like, let's sell a dress. It was never really about that, or rent a dress. It was always about the experience of giving people access to a culture and to an experience that they've never had before, or they were so unfamiliar with, or they really wanted to support their friends and be part of the culture. And so being able to provide that was something that we were really seeing catch on.
Oh, that's an amazing story that you were growing so organically. I'm curious how you knew that at what point did you realize, or what were the metrics like at the point when you decided that it was time to do this full time?
Honestly, it was like a time thing. It was like when exactly what Arian said, like when we had so many customers that the two of us couldn't like handle it part-time. Like when we would go to work in the mornings, we would bike from our building to like work, and we would have like FedEx boxes piled on our bikes to like take to the FedEx office before we go and stuff. And it just became like too much. So literally it was a sustainability, like lifestyle sustainability thing. At that point, we probably had like, maybe we had, I don't know, 30 renters a month or something even like that. But then it's like they're taking the dress, they're giving it back, we're taking it to the dry cleaner. Like rental is very operationally intensive. And we were doing it all ourselves. And like she said, like zero marketing. So it was all word of mouth. So that also made us be like, well, if we did market, like what could happen? I think a big turning point for us was there was like one wedding where we serviced 50 people going to that wedding, each with 2 outfits. It was October 2018. And that was the first time we're like, wait a minute, if we can service this many people for one wedding, and there are like this many weddings every year in the US alone, like this could be a really big market. I think that was also a turning point for us. And 6 months later, we were both working full time on it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, and that's insane. I'm curious if you guys started making a profit immediately. And generally, with e-commerce, I think this space is sort of notorious for having thin margins, a lot of inventory risk. So I'm curious, especially as the business grew, how do you think about inventory risk and management, and sort of optimizing the steps of the chain of, handing the dresses over, taking them to the dry cleaner, all of that?
I'll touch on that a little bit, and then maybe we'll switch into like what we're doing now, because I think like there's so much that goes into rental that we only scratched the surface on it, to the point that we obviously had to pivot. And I don't want to give any wrong answers as to what the economics look like in the long run. But for us, actually, your first question on profitability was actually really interesting, because what we did was we basically consigned the dresses. So these were outfits that were secondhand. So someone wore it once, and in the world of Instagram, nobody wanted to wear an outfit again. And so they obviously started with our dresses, but then it grew based off of, we sourced dresses from Indian Americans all across the country, and we only paid them when the outfit was rented. So we weren't buying anything up front. We basically were getting them on consignment. And when that dress rented, we would pay the owner a fraction of the rental, and then another fraction would go towards dry cleaning. So our margins were actually quite high, in the like 40+% range at the unit economic level on the rental. But over time, we did have to start to buy inventory, and that the economics would shift over time. But honestly, just as we did that is when COVID hit just a few months later, and we had to kind of pause all operations. And that's, and we started to obviously think, we can't do rental anymore. Rental is also just a really impossible, just like logistical challenge. And frankly, it's not beneficial for the customer. And I can't really tell if I'm telling this story to myself because we've given up on rental in some ways, or if it's actually true. But getting a dress on a Thursday and hoping to God that it fits you for a Friday event is actually really stressful on the consumer's part, which is why when we were renting, a lot of our sales and rentals came from in-person showroom events, which obviously isn't scalable or manageable. And when it specifically comes to Indian clothing, which fit is incredibly important, it makes it even more challenging over time to scale. So I'd say that, what we're now moving towards, which is a marketplace dropship model where we don't touch the inventory whatsoever. We work directly with the designer and have them ship it directly to the consumer. And over time, where we hope to add a secondhand arm to the marketplace where people can sell back or sell directly to the next customer. That will be a much more fluid and like easier rental model, both for us and easier for the customer as well, to not have to be stressed about receiving it on a Thursday, hoping it fits on a Friday, and then hope they get it in the mail on a Monday so that I could turn around again. All of those logistics, like we hope we never have to worry about again.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, are you able to speak a bit more about the direction that you're pivoting toward?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be really excited to talk about that because so yeah, as you all can imagine, just kind of completing the story on the rental side, like we quit our jobs in April 2019. We already had customers and traction. We were at SPC. Things were growing, which was always awesome about this business, like growing really quickly. We had some really great like user acquisition hacks that were helping us. We did YC, we raised a seed round, all on this model, this Indian clothing rental model. And we were frankly gearing up for a wedding season with this. So this was March of 2020. And we were like, oh my gosh, well, April is when like all of the big growth starts. So you can imagine how we both felt when like COVID hit. And just, it was like very disorienting, I think, for us. It was like, wait a minute. One day we had like this, what we thought was like a really promising business. And 2 weeks later, it's like nobody's having 500-person weddings, maybe for 2 years. So like, where do we go from there? So I would say, you know, in full disclosure with this SPC community, it's been a really difficult year for us since then, like figuring out what direction to go in, also like managing investor expectations and like everything else. We've learned a lot. So very happy to talk about like the whole pivoting process and even like the emotional journey of it. But we really do like to think that where we've come out is like an even bigger vision than where we started. And maybe COVID was like a blessing in disguise or kind of like a silver lining that forced us to really go back to the drawing board for all the reasons Arian said. We had kind of been losing faith in rental as like, is it really what the customer wants, or is it just a short-term band-aid solution? So when COVID hit, we went back to the drawing board. We're like, what do we still believe? Like, what it really excites us about this business? And it always came down to what Arian mentioned earlier. It's about sharing culture. It's like, there's something about making the world feel really small and like exposing people and exposing customers in the US and allowing them to discover and easily access clothing or goods from cultures around the world. Like that was always the magic of the experience of Riya Collective. It was manifested at that point in renting dresses, but we're like, there are other ways to manifest the same thing. But we knew that that was like the problem or the opportunity that we were solving for. So once we went back to that and we started thinking like, what would be really the best way to do that? Like, what is the way the customer really wants? And we were going off of like, because it was just the two of us for so many years, like doing all these showrooms, actually all of that came in handy because we had personally met hundreds, if not 1,000 customers each and like helped them get into the dresses. And like, I don't regret any of that time because we were talking to them the whole time. And we like understood our customer personas very, very well by this point. Like we have like 4 or 5 different personas, like what they want from us, what excites them and all that stuff. So we could build on that when we thought about our pivot. We combined like the opportunity space with what we knew about the customers. And so what we really started thinking is like, I mean, I guess where we're going with it is what people want is they want the experience that they would get if they we call it like walked into a store in New Delhi and like browsed the racks and found like this gorgeous Indian piece that fits them perfectly. That's of course what everybody wants. How do we recreate that in this COVID like e-commerce world? And it quickly became clear to us like e-commerce as it exists, scrolling through a page of like static photos is not going to get you that experience. So very quickly we were like, it's about virtual shopping. It's about video and virtual shopping to us. And we were watching our customers do this. We had an e-commerce platform at that point where people could order from designers. And we also had a Slack where we had like 50 women who were customers of ours. And what they would do is they would get the item and then they would share videos with each other and be like, hey, this is how I put it on. Like, this is 5 different ways I've styled it. And then other women would be like, oh, I was thinking of getting that, but I didn't. Now I actually do want it. And so we were watching these interactions happen and we're like, yeah, the feeling of like walking into a store, maybe meeting the designer, maybe the designer's holding up this piece and being like, this is how it's worn. And it just feels so much more intimate. And for a lot of these pieces, they're like boutiques that are selling these. The story behind the product and why the designer did what they did is like so intriguing for the buyer. So we kind of started really thinking about what is a more dynamic, interactive buying experience through video and virtual. And then kind of the other side of it is like, frankly, how can we bring the price down? Like it's a lot for any of these formal outfits, but even like if you're buying a bomber jacket from India that has a lot of mirror work on it, you're talking about like $120, $150 jacket, and then there's shipping on top of it. And for the maker in India, it also doesn't really make sense to like ship one piece at a time to the US. So we started thinking more about like the group buying piece as well. Like, what if we got 30 people to buy the same jacket together at the same time? And would that like bring down costs on both sides? So really the MVP that we're launching now, and we call it social shopping, but it's really these two features. It's like a video virtual based shopping through which you can shop designers around the globe, and also do it through like a group buying experience that helps you like bring the price down and also make it like more sustainable.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I think this sort of question around how do you have a more interactive buying experience that mirrors IRL shopping in a COVID world is really relevant. And yeah, I'm super excited to see what you guys end up launching. I just had a few more questions, mostly around your co-founder relationship and the role that SPC has played, and then we can open it up to the audience. So first question is, can you speak about the role that SPC played in founding Riya Collective?
Absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite topics. And actually, it probably should be a fun fact that I shared at the beginning, which I think I might be one of the few people that have made round trips at YC, where I leave and then I come back and then I leave again and then come back.
SPC, you mean?
Huh?
At SPC.
At SPC, yes. Yeah. So I joined SPC in January of 2019, and Sarina, once she left Funding Circle in March, joined immediately. And I think the spirit of the community and all of its members, predominantly driven obviously by Ruchi, is one that like I think fosters so much creativity and support that every single person that was there, from Stephen, who I know is on this call, to so many others, had really supported us during a time where we were very, very early and very much figuring things out day by day. And it was, yeah, I think like in some ways, the like comfort of being part of a community of creators and people that understand that like when you're starting a company, there's just so many unknowns and there's so many questions to be answered, and having that like built-in support system within the community, I think it is like an unfair advantage in so many ways. And so I would say that, yeah, between the people and just like the supportiveness of the space, it really helped us focus on the right things and also feel like, okay, nobody has the right answer, because oftentimes you go to investor meetings and we would hear a lot of no's because we were going around talking about Indian clothing as if it was like a massive business to many investors who frankly were white and not, didn't understand the pain point. And then we would come back to SPC and kind of feel that support from the community. And so I think in so many more ways than one that like the community and the space has been pretty paramount in getting us to where we are today.
Totally.
That's great to hear. And then another question, in what ways are you two different as co-founders, and how have you sort of managed these differences and grown your co-founder relationship over time? Especially, I guess it's been what, 10 plus years?
Yeah, no, it's like a really good question. I think one thing, I mean, we were best friends before we started Riya Collective, and I would say like even then we've learned so much about each other co-founding, because it's a totally different type of journey, like building a baby together basically. And then I would say that's even more true in the last year of pivoting, when, as we've said, like we kind of had an idea and traction when we started Riya Collective 1.0, as we now call it, the rental business. And that was a totally different thing than starting from scratch and like feeling really demotivated and kind of carrying each other through that. So our friendship and also I think our co-foundership has evolved so much over the past 2 years. I think to the point where we can probably answer your question better now of like what's different between us, or like what different strengths are we bringing to the table. I think one thing that's kind of become really obvious is we've had different experiences coming into this. Like Arian has started 2 companies in the past, and she's also like was very early at Homejoy. So she really knows and understands this like 0 to 1 phase, and like just the hustle and the creativity and innovation that's needed to like move the ball forward in extreme ambiguity. And I've really worked much more at growth stage companies and like growing and scaling teams and building teams. And so we kind of tend to, now that we've realized this, we come at every problem like a little bit differently. So if we're faced with the question, Arian's first kind of reaction is like, how do we solve this? And what's 5 things we can do tomorrow to like make this not a problem anymore? And the first way that I think about it is like, what's the framework or the strategy that we would put together, and like how would we act on this in like 3 or 4 months? And so now we call this like middle strategy, where we're like, we actually need both things. Like mine is high level and hers is maybe like more tactical, and like how do we find the middle that like can motivate both of us? And so that's something like we've been talking about, for example, a lot, but like both are really necessary. I think she pushes me in a really good way that like strategy is not enough. You have to be able to like do something tomorrow. And I think I have like the opposite impact as well. So yeah, we try to use it as like a strength between the 2 of us instead of like differences. So that's kind of one example. I don't know, Arian, if you have like another one.
No, I think it's such a funny question, because like when you look at us and when you like hear our backgrounds, you're like, oh, cool, you're best friends and you're co-founders and you went to MIT, you're like the same person. And like Sarina explained, like we're quite different, like in that I think that's like the perfect example of how in 12 months of COVID, like literally this exact day a year ago, I was in a New York City pop-up showroom that we had created for our customers in New York for 2 weeks. And I was like about to shut it down because of COVID. So it's wild, I guess, in some ways to look back and realize how different things were, and all that we've gone through. But it really has been like an incredible like learning experience, realizing that and taking on this challenge of, okay, well, we're starting from like this, we want to create something huge, maybe we were limited by the rental like idea before, and now we can kind of use this as an opportunity to build something huge. Like there's so many ways to go about that. Like how do we do it and play to our strengths at the same time?
Absolutely. It sounds super valuable that the 2 of you have, these sorts of different ways of approaching problems, but are able to reconcile them. All right. Do people in the audience have any questions? Yeah, go ahead, actually.
Forgive me if you guys mentioned, but I don't think you did. I know that you're pivoting towards more of like an in-person or virtual like shopping experience. Do you guys have any plans to open a brick and mortar store in the future? When will be?
It's a good question, because I feel like every good like e-commerce retailer is like omni-channel now. For us, I think that will be like very far off, because we don't want to touch the inventory. We really want like designers sending stuff here, and our designers are all over the world. Like right now they're in India, but we want them to be like truly global. So I think part of our allure will be how can we almost like recreate that in-person experience virtually, but maybe not think about brick and mortar for at least a long time, I think.
Yeah.
That makes sense. As a quick follow-up to that, given that this is sort of a 2-sided marketplace, connecting the designers on one end and the buyers on the other end, how are you thinking about sort of managing and aggregating demand on both sides?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a hard one, I guess, in this position to answer as thoroughly as I would want us to, but I guess the way we're starting to get this MVP out is really to start with like the best product that the best designer partners can provide us. And so we're really going out and trying and manually kind of growing this marketplace, starting on the supply side, with very close feedback from the customer side. And so like Sarina mentioned, what's been really interesting is since we haven't really been building this app, we've just been prototyping all of these behaviors in a Slack community that we've built and are growing. And so it is like, we are going to manually manage it off the bat, but over time, I think our hope is that we make a social like experience so that people can come online and not really be restricted on the products that we offer at any given time, and that they can come in and actually use it for some other social benefit as well. Those are some of the like evolutions we imagine, but I think it will definitely be a little bit of kind of a manual effort in the beginning to make sure that we are bringing on the right supply that is interesting and intriguing to the designer, to the customer, that will like help us grow the customer side.
Well, I think Christina, you raised your hand.
Yeah, great to see you guys again, Arian and Sarina.
Great to see you too.
So I'm curious, when COVID hit and you guys were thinking about pivoting, has it always been like just you guys just knew that you were going to pivot within the same space and build on top of what you had, or did you at all consider maybe scratching the whole thing and returning money to investors and
Yeah, it's interesting. So we never considered returning money to investors. I think that's one thing like we would say to each other. We're like, listen, we got this money. We have ourselves like, however many years, like we're going to build something. So no, we never considered, although I will say like, confidentially, like investors asked, and it was very stressful to like go through saying no, to them, and like some weird interactions that we had with them. But yes, we never intended to return the money. But we were like, how do we make this like worth the valuations that we got after YC, So then your next question of like, did we ever consider maybe like completely leaving Indian clothing? Because we could have done that. Like we did actually. There was a few days or whatever, a little bit of time, a few weeks maybe, where we opened up the idea to each other of like, hell, we could become like B2B SaaS tomorrow. We could do something in fintech, which is like the world I come from, or like AI, the world that she comes from. So we're like, we did open that up. And I actually think that was a really healthy exercise for us, because like Arian said, we started Riya based on like my wedding. It was very organic. Like I had a pain point. We had a pain point. We always felt like we kind of fell into it. And frankly, I think we were a little insecure as founders, where we were like, we would always start with like, oh, we're not fashion people. We just like found this problem and it happens to be like a good one, so we are solving it. So we would kind of justify like why we were doing it. And now with COVID, when it opened up the opportunity of like, sure, why don't you go build like fintech or B2B SaaS or whatever, it forced us to like recommit to our vision, because we started looking around and we're like, actually, from whatever all has happened, we've built a lot of conviction around this space and this idea, and passion for this opportunity. And so it kind of like reframe the problem in our own minds as something we've chosen and we're very excited to work on, as opposed to something like we fell into. So yes, we did go through that exercise, but we still felt like when we went back to the drawing board, like this was the opportunity we felt like was not being tapped. And when we evaluated it that way, we decided to like stay in the same market, but just change how we were doing it.
Yeah, I would even add like we're mission driven, I guess. And I think with Riya Collective and our current kind of iteration of it, we continue to be able to support like disenfranchised designers and brands and creators that have been the most hardest hit in COVID. And that has been, I think, really motivating over the last 6 to 9 months as we've started to crystallize and solidify what we want to create. In so many ways, we're like doing it for them, like you said, kind of like maybe it would have been easier for us to be like, take the money back. This is like a miserable situation to be building a company in, especially in our industry. But we were like looking and admiring in so many ways the like resilience of these brands and designers. And I think our hope is like we can create something that really empowers them. And like Sarina said, I think just having that feeling has been so motivating and drove us to commit even more to it.
Cool, thanks.
Can you guys talk a little bit about like how you navigated the process of just explaining to your investors, like, like how you should pivot, like what you should do, what feedback you got from them, minus all the bad stuff that they asked for?
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's such a good question. I think we've learned a big lesson in the past 6 months about like communicating with investors, frankly. So yeah, in the beginning, obviously they had invested 2 weeks before in this fast growing weddings rental business. So when they realized there's no weddings, their rationale was like, obviously you're going to have to do something very different than what we just invested in. So like either you should cut your valuation, or maybe we should take the money back, or whatever it was. So we spent a while just like justifying things to them, I think, where we were like, oh no, like we'll come up with another idea. We already have these ideas. And in pursuit of that, one thing we caught ourselves doing later, we realized we did, is we felt a real pressure to generate revenue really fast, to replace the revenue almost that we had before. And that forced us to think that caused us to think in a little bit of a limited way. So basically the way our brains worked was like, we were making X amount per month. Like now we need to show them that we can quickly go from 0 to at least like 10K a month or 20K a month. And so we launched this e-commerce platform, which you can see online. If you go to riacollective.com right now, it's like, you'll see that we're actually selling items through there. And the reason we did that, I think in big part, was like, we wanted to be able to show that like we have ways to generate money. Later but behind the scenes, like Arian and I were talking about all these other things, virtual shopping, social shopping, like where we thought the world was going. But we would awkwardly like not tell our investors about that part. We would just focus on the like revenue with them to make them like feel better, kind of. We thought it made them feel better, and it made us feel better to like be able to show them numbers every time. And so it finally kind of came to a head, I think, towards like the end of the summer, early fall or something. And it has been like breaking down barriers ever since then, when we've actually become closer with our VCs, where they started asking us like, is this what you guys actually want to do? Like building this e-commerce platform. And we had like a heart to heart with our main investor at one point, where we're like, no, we actually want to build this like way bigger vision. It's just that we don't have like revenue or traction for that yet. So we were worried about telling you about it. And I will say, like, that was a very honest conversation, where he ended up kind of being like, look, we want you guys to build something really big and that you're excited about. So in the end of the day, and like, what's not said there is like, they already have their money in with us and we're not giving it back. So like, they kind of have to, so like it benefited. And so then we started having a real conversation about like what excites. And he even said, he's like, our best chance of making money back on this is like you guys working on something you're really excited about. So I guess what I wish I had done is like take control of the narrative with the VCs earlier and have more confidence of being like, okay, this didn't work through no fault of ours. COVID is not something we could have like predicted. We're not going to talk to you for 3 months. Let us figure out what we're doing. And when we come back, like, we'll tell you, just like controlling the narrative instead of being like, oh, we have this monthly on the calendar. I have to show up every month and like show them some kind of numbers for something. I think it was like a very first time founder like route to go down, because we don't have board members. They're all on a safe. They invested in a seed. They don't own like that much of the company. We should have, I think, felt more empowered to be like, this is our kind of our show and we'll tell you what we're doing. And instead, I think, well, we were very ambiguous for months about what we ourselves were doing. And that made us feel less confident in like presenting a vision to them. But I think in retrospect, like just kind of the more confidence we show, the more confident they are in
Yeah.
us.
I think that's a really good question. And like, even what we've learned, it's been like a difficult learning for us, but like, I think the way I would say it is like, we realize that like, if we're changing the story for one person or for a group of people and it's not exciting, then like we need to like take control of that and realize that like, that's probably the wrong story to be telling. And I agree with Sarina, like, it's definitely something we wish we learned earlier, but I think the type of relationship we had with our investors based on the experience they gave us at the beginning of COVID with like, kind of broke down that trust. So I think like trust for us with like everyone involved was like the number one thing that you should always have.
Totally.
I have one more follow-up question. How about the ones that were, there has to be some that are supportive, right? How about like how did they navigate the process for you guys?
Yeah, well, absolutely. There have been actually some of the early angels, the like pre-seed round type angels, who have been so helpful and like so supportive throughout all of this. And the thing is, like with them, they really invested in us. They invested in me and Arian like all along, because they invested before even our rental business was anything in many ways, you know? And so they kind of them reminding us of that repeatedly, of like, we invested in you guys and you guys will come up with something, was always really encouraging. Some of them just offering to like be a soundboard. Some of them like telling us to take a break was really nice, actually, to hear them say like, hey, this must be really stressful. Also, if you didn't want to work on this for like 2 or 3 months, like you could stop. That was like, it was very liberating. We didn't take that route, but like, as an entrepreneur, you sometimes feel like these investors, they're the closest thing you have to like a boss or someone that you're like accountable to. And to have them like empathize to that extent, some of them empathize to that extent with the story and what's happened, and really be like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So like, if you guys wanted to go back to the drawing board and take X amount of time, like you should do that. So those kind of things were really supportive. And we did find that in a lot of our like early angel investors, especially.
That's great to hear. I did have another question, which is, obviously you two are both female founders, and I'm curious if you can speak to that experience, and sort of if there were any unique challenges that you faced along the way.
Unique challenges. Oh man, I feel like we had so many. We were reflecting on that earlier today too. Just even in YC, how like no other team looked like us. Which I think honestly we're gonna take that as like an advantage rather than anything else. But I think something I was referencing earlier around just the fundraising journey, and realizing that 9 out of 10 times, like the people we were talking to couldn't relate to the problem we were trying to solve. It made that particularly difficult. And I think even related to what Sarina was just talking about around like the story and the feeling we always had of wanting to show and prove something when it comes to revenue or growth, was a feeling that like I think a pressure we uniquely put on ourselves, and maybe a lot of female founders put on themselves in comparison to like male counterparts, that I definitely think if we reflect on, we didn't see that kind of same story when we talk to any other founder in our YC batch or in our like small group of like YC founders that we keep in touch with. It's definitely something that's kind of unique to us.
Yeah, the like desire to show like traction and numbers. Actually, the Rent the Runway founder, Jen Hyman, talks about this a lot as a difference between like male and female founders, she feels, in terms of like the expectations we're held to. That like, the way she puts it very simplistically is like male founders get away more with like, I just have a big vision, like give me 5 million. And for female founders, it's like, but how much revenue have you generated? And like, is it profitable? And like all that stuff. And whether that was put on us or we put that on ourselves, we definitely like fell into that trap until very recently.
What advice do you have for female founders that are fundraising?
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
It's a grind.
I was gonna say, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like we have more just like advice for people who just founders who are starting from the beginning. Exactly what you said. Like, there's no easy path. Like, you're gonna go through, potentially like testing yourself in ways like you really never have before. And I think people would say that before, and I didn't know what that meant. And they would also say like, so you have to be really, really passionate about the idea that you're starting in order to like withstand those periods. I would say like maybe that's true, but for me, and I think Arian, it's been like you have to be really, really passionate about the person you're starting it with. that's been much more of my experience, and I think Arian's as well. That's like, you have to believe in one or the other. And for us, the anchor that's like kept us really like going through all this is like Arian said in the very start of this, like we always wanted to start a business together. Like the idea, this experience of starting it together and like the belief that we have in each other as a co-founding team is like the one thing we never question, you know? And so it's like, even if we were like, maybe it's not even rental, like I said, maybe it's like B2B SaaS or whatever, we're like, but we're the right people to like do this. We really feel that. And that's been like, when everything else failed the past year, like the one thing we keep coming back to. So I think like trust in your co-founder, if you're not a solo founder, like the trust and the like alignment, that's like really everything. And then maybe passionate about the idea or the space as well.
Since we're on the co-founder relationship topic, could you speak a little bit more to maybe the main challenges of that best friend to co-founder transition? Because honestly and sadly, I've only heard of failed examples where in mild cases, people just walk away and don't talk to each other, or in terrible cases, best friends become enemies, and like it's just a mess. So
Yeah, I think we've all heard those stories, and it's so like, it's sad to think about that. I think a couple of things for us, like from the very beginning, we've always said, and we continue to remind each other that like the friendship is the most important thing. And that will like never change. And that commitment and that continued commitment and that vocalization about it, I think is like, takes us through periods like COVID where there's many months we couldn't see each other in person, which is obviously really difficult. I think the other thing is like, you have to be like structured as well, like, because we, like Sarina mentioned, like she comes with so much experience in like teams. And so like setting up the structure to like have regular feedback, and know that that feedback is never personal. It's like meant to make each other and collectively both of us better, and like kind of receive it from a place of like no ego, and knowing that like that is really like,
I literally have that on my computer, like a little post-it that says that, because that's become like such a catchphrase for us this past year.
Yeah, I think I can't imagine like if you don't have that like trust and that ability to like say what's on your mind to the other person, and also hear that other person out very genuinely, then I think that's when like relationships devolve into like, what you just described. But I think the other thing very tactically is like, when we started, as soon as we raised like our pre-seed, we signed up for like an exec coach.
Yep.
Because we wanted to make sure that we had a routine of like, as productively as possible, surfacing the right things to each other and even to ourselves. I think, it's just as important what you tell yourself as what you tell the other person. And like what each of us need to hear internally is very different from what the other person needs to hear. So just like the ability and the desire to like want to learn about the other person, I think is a strength of being such close friends. But on the flip side, like a weakness in some ways when you don't use that, like when you don't use that strength.
Totally. I was just going to double down on what you said about the exec coach, in the sense like knowing when to ask for help, because I think if you are best friends and you go into it, you're like, we already know how to handle everything. Like that's the trap. Like we already know how to talk to each other. We've been through so much together anyways. But like knowing when we've reached a point in a debate or an argument or whatever, where we're like, we're not making any progress and we need like a third party. And we've actually done that a few times with our exec coach, and it's been like super helpful.
Yeah.
Have you guys thought at any point about bringing on a third co-founder or growing your team? Especially since I guess I don't know how technical your product is, but it doesn't seem like either of you have a technical background.
Yeah. Well, we've actually had both. I will start with the with the growing our team part, because that's the part I'm very excited about. So we are growing, we've been growing our team. We actually had a sizable team going into COVID. We had to let pretty much everyone go except for one person. But our team is now growing again. We just brought on the first technical hire on our team. And we have 2 other engineers as well. So we'll have like a 3-person engineering team. And then we have a few folks on kind of like the merchandising side in India that are helping with their relationship, as well as a marketing person. Throughout COVID, we kept one person on our team who was running marketing for us pre-COVID and just helped us helped pull the story and the brand out and like the vision out of us. Because I think over, the first 3 to 6 months, we had lost a lot of like confidence, I would say, because in full transparency, because it was just like such a difficult time, an emotional one. And she helped, she was on this journey with us. And I think like, obviously she wasn't a co-founder, but she was part of it. And I think it's really difficult in some ways, something that like, again, like biggest strength, biggest weakness for us, like our biggest strength is our friendship, and our biggest weakness is having a third person in our friendship, feeling like they're constantly like being compared to one of us. And so I think that was like a really difficult kind of period as well, just having 3. At one point in time, we had, at the very, very beginning, we had like a third co-founder, or was gonna be co-founder, but was working on this while we were working on it part-time before we committed to doing this. And I think we realized that it's very difficult to have like 3 people all with like variations on skill sets, but no like unique, skill set that's like, not someone else couldn't make up for it. So we didn't kind of like continue with that third person.
That makes sense.
Hey, I have a question. I'm curious on your sustainability mission, and I saw on your website, I saw 5 criteria to satisfy that for designers, and I'm wondering which one is the hardest to satisfy and why.
The one that we have the least like knowledge about, and it's the hardest to check, is like, is this designer paying ethical wages like to their employees? Over time, as we scale, like we would love to have ways of auditing all of our designers and like going and looking at their factories and stuff like that, but we just don't have that ability right now. So in many ways we have to kind of take their word for it or go off of like the brand or what they say today. But yeah, thanks for bringing this up, because we haven't touched on sustainability yet, and that's always been like such a core driver. That's why we did rental to start with. We would say to each other, like, we don't want to ever build a business that just puts more stuff into the world. And so we liked the idea of like the circular economy. So when we pivoted to even the e-commerce model where, designers are sending stuff from India, we kind of made a pact to only work with small batch producers doing 70% handmade clothing, like things like that we really believe in. And yeah, I think most of it we can vet, but the one about like, I think part of sustainability is supply chain sustainability. Are they paying are they paying people a living wage and things like that, which especially in the garment working industry is like a very fraught topic in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So yeah, I guess that's to say that's the hardest one to validate.
By the way, that's a very admiring mission to start with.
Thank you.
Just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
Really glad you brought it up.
I'm sorry I was late, guys, but I wanted to say hi and how exciting it was to see this on the calendar.
Great to see you.
You too.
It's so nice to see all these familiar faces. We definitely miss you guys all, and hopefully we can meet up in person when everything's more back to normal.
Yeah.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
And there's so many new babies now that we need to meet.
Another one soon.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Was it in a week?
In a way, yes. Well, March 30th is the due date, but like they said like 23rd, like he could come anytime starting then. So yeah, I guess in like a week or two. I know, it's crazy. Very exciting.
Yeah.
I have like one more question. Hopefully it's like not too it's off the topic of like teams and like co-founders, but who do you see as your customer as like a personality? Because looking at your virtual shopping page, it's organized by designer. And like someone like me who's like just like white American girl, like I've never heard of any of these designers. So I feel like, so I'm like wondering like, oh, like who is your customer and who do you build that for in your mind?
Question.
It's a great question. Yeah. I think first the website is like, I paid no attention to it anymore because it's so poorly designed and I like am very embarrassed by it. But I think the reality for us is we're starting with like this core audience that we know really well, which is like the South Asian diaspora. But what we're quickly seeing is it's very much not limited to them. We get orders from all sorts of people all the time today, many whom are, American, never heard of, just kind of saw a pretty jacket on a friend or shoes and they purchase them. But what our goal has been over the last 6 months is really understanding the like psyche of the South Asian diaspora and like what they're looking for and what they think of when they hear Indian clothing, because people have so many different images in their head. Most people think of a sari. Like if you hear me say Indian clothing on this site, even on this Zoom, you're thinking like, sorry, why would I need that in my day-to-day? So what we've been really exploring is how do we change the narrative and change the image that comes to mind when you hear handmade in India. And it's really these just unique kind of like boho pieces, frankly, that are just small batch, handmade, embroidered, maybe beaded, and just have some touch of artisanship that is like originates in India or any of these other countries. So the South Asian American is currently the one that's most excited about it because many of them grew up spending like 2 weeks to a month, a year visiting family in India and seeing all of these handmade products that they can walk around these small shops and purchase. And so we're starting with that customer because they're slightly educated about what exists and they have like an image that's most closely like aligned with ours. But I think over time we could quickly move towards anyone and everyone that just wants something that's handmade. And that's what I hope our like, video shopping app will convey to those customers.
Cool, thank you.
No, great question.
Thanks all so much. This was really fun. Thanks, Amy, for moderating as well.
Yeah. And
thank you both for coming.
It's so good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to come by SPC when we start reopening. We also have wait, Arian, you're in SF right now, aren't you? For a little, are you visiting or are you?
I am here. I leave on Sunday, but I'll be back in June.
Oh, okay.
And then I'll be there. I'll come visit.
Oh, for sure. Hopefully by then we can meet in person, but I hesitate to even put dates on it. But if this summer, we definitely all should, and we should come by. We'll definitely come by SPC.
Yeah.
Bring that baby.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Love it. Thanks, guys. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.